So we're ready for our first questions. Do we have anybody in the audience that's willing to step up first here? We've got Dr. Klein.
Hey, that's really loud. The texting of the questions went really, really well. Congratulations to everyone for doing that. Start off with a bit of a snowball to Dr. Connor here. You can knock this one out of here. Joe, what would have you done differently in May of 2013 if you knew then what you know now?
Well, snowball's a good comment because we've got, I think, 8 inches in Illinois and going to get another 8 on the weekend. Yeah, so what we would have done differently in May is to use the multiple disciplines, focus on those early cases, and get the right people in the barns at the pig level, and then really critically evaluate some of the input we were getting in terms of it can't be this or this can't be the source. We needed to be more critical in terms of that information.
We have another one. Are we ready with another question yet? I've got one here, Joe, as a follow-up. If you were king for a day, I know that's a little scary, right? How would you create and engage this epidemiological study model that you've talked about? How would you finance it first, probably create it, and engage that group?
I think we've got to ask ourselves, where's that funding going to come from? And it's likely got to be internal funding. I believe that we're going to need to go to a retainer system that would have funds available for specialists in those disciplines that we're going to need to pull on. We're going to need to have multiple people in those disciplines because on any given day, not every one of those people can drop what they're doing and be part of that investigation. So I see it as a rotating group, a volunteer group, funding set out that would be up front so that they are paid. They certainly are experts in their field. They are committed to drop what they're doing and to start that process, and then to work through a centralized coordinator.
Dr. Fangman.
Yes, this question is for Dr. Christensen. As you addressed the topic of loose sow housing across Europe, I think I understood you to say that in order to comply, there was about a 25 to 33% reduction possibly in the inventory at those sites. Is it a correct assumption that those that are in 100% compliance then saw a reduction in sow inventory within those countries and maybe the decision-making property associated with that?
I think that question is complex because it goes country by country. If you look at countries that are doing retrofits, which would be relevant to the U.S. given the age of the buildings, you're certainly looking at a reduction in the 20s of the sow herd. What we've seen in several countries is smaller sized sow farms have switched to finished production. They've said it's not viable, we're getting out of pigs or we're changing our model. So in some of those mid-sized European countries, we've certainly seen a reduction simply because they have not gone to loose house sows. They've been dependent on importing finisher pigs from the Netherlands or Denmark, where we've seen a massive increase in that market. So it depends. In Spain, we've seen an expansion, given that they've have a contract model that's allowed them to comply and expand at the same time. So it's country by country, I guess.
Angela, you're on the Welfare Committee of the AASV and you're chairperson of the National Pork Board. Can you give us just a little bit of an overview of what the objectives of those committees are today as it relates to where we are with welfare in the United States?
The National Pork Board, we just got done having our committee meetings last week where we go over, we have a certain amount of money from the checkoff program, and we have a call for research based on welfare, so that based on different topics, different academics and producers will put forth research topics for us to evaluate and then potentially fund. So that's one aspect of the pork board, because it is a producer-based or funded program or organization. We decide and have to try to figure out which research topics are the most timely and most beneficial to the industry. So that's one of the objectives for that. Some of the other things that come out of the National Pork Board's Welfare Committee can be suggestions or information that go to forum, and Joe talked about forum in his presentation as well, and didn't mention it in my talk, but in the past, one of the things that has been talked about is blunt force trauma, and making recommendations potentially to phase that out as a primary euthanasia method. Keep it for emergency situations and as a secondary or a backup, but that's some of the discussions that happen in those meetings. With AASV, it depends on the relevant topic at the time and how AASV can put out information to the membership, and then to also go and try to glean information and also interact with the AVMA. Because I put up the AVMA position statement, and we have Michelle Sprague, who's our representative for the AVMA on the Welfare Committee for AVMA. And so it's just trying to do what is timely for the industry as far, or for our organization as far as AASV.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, we've got another question that was brought in through the text. I think it's a question for the entire group, okay? How does an industry that continues to squeeze producers with low margins have the money to introduce these important technologies when they don't have the money to properly heat barns, hire employees, and even conduct minimal repairs?
Well, okay. I thought you were king, Joe. I thought you were supposed to solve these issues. I didn't know that. But, Greg, I mean, that's I would put that back a little bit. I understand where our producers like to have that commentary, but I really think it's a choice question, not a voluntary question. I had some interesting conversations here in the last 10 days, really, with some producers about how do they move forward, and really the question is, are we going to fight for what we want to do, or are we going to fight for what the customer wants to pay us for? And I think agriculture is the only industry in the world that doesn't understand we have a customer that would like to pay for things, and I find that interesting, right? I mean, if you just talk to other business guys that work in other industries, they would very much do market surveys, try to figure out what we want, whether we want a one-dose vaccine or a two-dose vaccine is an example, et cetera, right? Do I want mint-flavored toothpaste or spearmint-flavored, or, you know, chocolate chip-flavored toothpaste, right? They don't put that out there because they had a crazy idea. They put it out there because they had some data to suggest somebody wanted to buy that. And I think we in ag tend to think, oh, it's cost, 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 instead of, oh, by the way, they might pay more for something else. And I find it absolutely fascinating that if you look at how our market's segmented today, if you listen to what Peter talked about with respect to how we behave irrationally in this idea of behavioral economics. I mean, we put out there two products today. We put out the fruit and nut version of food, i.e. Whole Foods, ABF, hugged, loved, kissed, completely economically unsustainable, right? But there are people willing to pay for that. It's sustainable on a small scale. And we put out cheap, 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 and we try to compete with the bloody chicken guys. We don't give them middle choice, right? Look at the data Peter had on the board today, right? We always choose the middle. Chevrolet doesn't offer two kinds of cars. They offer the Malibu LT, the LTZ, and the LS. You can pick which one you want. It's all the same car with slightly different attributes. And I think agriculture has to kind of figure that out, and that's really the only way we're going to get around some of these issues. Not everybody wants every pig raised outside in the mud with worms and added salmonella, right? That's my favorite question when I go to the restaurant. Well, this is organic chicken. Does that come with the added salmonella or the Campy? I don't know. You tell me. Right? But by the same token, we don't give people an alternative in the middle either, and I think that's we don't think about this from a margin standpoint, and I basically would answer your question, Greg, after that long rambling diatribe. That's whining, not reality. It's a choice we make, not a reality.
Anybody else?
I'd say well done, Jim.
There was a question brought up on pain mitigation. Go ahead.
I think Tom had a question.
Tom,
here.
go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks all of you for great presentations. My question goes to both Angela and Peter. We talk about drawing our line or deciding what we're not going to give into. As an association, how do we decide what is our limit, or what is our point where we won't go down? Obviously, we have people with differences in opinions. Do we go with at least something that meets 51% of the agreement? That's our bottom line. Or how do we decide, where do we draw that line to decide where we need to fight for?
Thank you. Is another fair way of saying that is, what are the non-negotiables? Yeah, great question.
Okay, well, I mean, the dead elephant in the room is crates. That's what everybody's saying they're thinking. You and I both would probably agree that we can work with crates or with pens. We just need to manage those, have the right people in place. But our customers are not liking crates. I think we've got some major players in the industry, the Smithfields, the Cargills, that have, they have exports and they've got a lot of customers, and they're going to appease those customers. The National Pork Board can't get into that because they're a checkoff base, so they have to represent everybody and make everybody happy. So there has to be some consensus at some point, whether that's the NPPC. There has to be somebody that steps forward, and it is going to make people mad, especially the ones that don't agree with the decision. And I'm sure Canada had some of those same pains and angst when they were doing theirs. But I don't know how to answer who the right people are going to be. But my dad is a very wise man. He once told me, he goes, Angela, you are not, if you don't piss somebody off every day, you're not doing your job. So there's going to come a point in time when we have to cross the lines and figure out what we're doing. But I don't know who that group is.
If you ask my personal opinion, I'd say loose house farrowing is a no-go. I'd say 30-day gestation in crates, keep it if you can. Absolutely fight tooth and nail never to get loose house farrowing. And I'd say sell pain mitigation for whatever 1 cent a pig or whatever it is for a non-steroidal agent. If you can mute that discussion, I'd do that and move forward. 30 days in crates, loose house, never loose in farrowing, and go. That's going to buy you a lot of time at the lowest possible cost. That's my personal opinion. And again, it's a $7 billion industry of export.
Got a question over here.
I had a question for you, Peter. You talked about framing the debate or framing the response, and I liked your idea about what's reasonable antibiotic use as you talk about some of the antibiotic uses. But how does that, as you frame that debate, how does that not become a one-upmanship like we've seen with some of these other issues as welfare and some of that? How do you stay out of that one-upmanship type scenario?
I think that's a good question, Paul, because I mean, are you going to be compared to Cyprus or to Norway, right? But I think now it's dangerous not knowing what your consumption is. I think that's very easy to spin as being complacent or not giving a damn. So I think, yeah, it's a deep end of the pool. I fully agree. But I think it has to you tie that in with food safety and with the fact that sick animals are treated. And that's what a reasonable baseline looks like with 6 million sows. And Cyprus has, you got on both ends of that spectrum, you got extremely small, quote unquote, irrelevant production countries, right? So I think you got to be brave and establish that baseline and then know behind closed doors, what are our 10-year plan here? What's it actually cost us to take out metaphylactic in-feed antibiotics? What happened if we did that? What would happen if water meds went? What would the impact be? Where could we go and what's it going to cost us? It's a closed-door strategy session, and I think you have to establish the baseline and then take it from there. Otherwise, that baseline is going to be set a lot lower. That's my personal opinion, I guess.
Yeah, another question over here.
It's for Angela. Angela, I've dealt with the FDA for many years, and of course, when you talk to them, at least in the political sense, they always come out with a yes or no answer. But in reality, anybody that's been in the pharma community knows that that's not how they typically regulate. And when it comes to things like pain medication, indications are that they're much more flexible in terms of what our industry can and cannot do than their public answers would suggest. And they certainly have shown no propensity to go out and actively regulate use of things like lidocaine or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, whatever you want to pick. What do you think is a practical solution for the industry today in terms of dealing with pain practically in young pigs, where there's certainly not much risk to the pigs themselves, there's not any risk to the consumer in reality from residues or the use of those products, and there certainly is a perception risk to the industry if we do nothing, which is what our historical use has been.
Practical means for pain mitigation right now. I mean, as you know, there's some topical products out there, and that's for a surface type of incision would be some help. You know, that's there. But for a longer lasting analgesia for the pig, you know, we really don't have anything. There's, you know, for an older animal, we could utilize aspirin to some form, but, you know, for long term, I don't know. Aspirin doesn't do exactly what we need to do. But there's nothing else. I mean, we have to start thinking outside the box, or we have to get some new pharmaceuticals to the industry.
So that leads into a question that Angela asked us at BI during her presentation that I think, in the fairness of questions, we need to try and address, and that's Meloxicam in the marketplace today with pigs. And I'm going to call on Del just to briefly explain where BI's position in the U.S. today is here first, and then maybe a little audience participation from Canada with Dr. DeRosier is following up to that.
So I guess the first thing I would say is this is a frustrating one for us. The short answer is we continue to evaluate and look at potential opportunities. But as Dr. Boehringer had alluded to in a part of her presentation, is the FDA hurdles that are involved. And what is there today requires us to start from ground zero. So this is a complete development program to get a product that would have a swine label on it. So as you can imagine, the cost that's involved, and probably in our case even more so the time that's involved to get a potential product to the marketplace. And then, of course, it goes back to the cost element of it. Will we be able to come with a product that would have a cost that would be feasible for production? And again, going back to Dr. Lowe's comments and so forth, the key is, well, what will the consumer pay for a product like this? The difference. And, of course, then it comes into the differentiation, competing meat products and that type of thing. So, again, long answer, but, we are continuing to look at opportunities here in this area. And any of you that have any insight, what have you, that you'd like to share with us, certainly look us up, and be glad to hear your viewpoints on that. So,
thanks, Del. Dr. DeRosier. Sorry to put you on the spot, but Robert, would you mind giving us just a little perspective from Canada on Meloxicam?
Yep, the product is licensed in Canada. It's been licensed about a year ago. And how do you say that? The reason for using it is non-infectious locomotor disorders and inflammation. However, right now everybody is looking at alternatives to do something about the July 1st, 2016, when you will have to use an analgesic for castration. So we do have a lot of questions about it now, and some people are using it as long as there is a veterinary to veterinary consultation. So in other words, I can't talk about that to a producer working for BI, but if a veterinarian is asking me questions about it for the use of on castration, then yeah, we can talk about it. Not too sure if there's something else that you would like me to add.
From a cost perspective, are the producers finding it to be cost prohibitive, or where are they seeing that now from an analgesic?
It's about 8 cents per pig, so it's not cost prohibitive. And actually, there are some people who are saying that they do appreciate the fact that when they are injecting the piglets, they feel that they are doing better, during the suckling period. I realize that there are studies that have not shown that, but some producers don't want to stop just for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. May I ask you a question? Yeah, Angela would like one more follow-up, Robert. Sorry, you're getting on the spot here, so. Angela.
I want to know, you kind of alluded to that the pigs are doing better. Are you guys actively doing any on-farm research, any research to look at performance and maybe immune status or anything with those pigs treated with Meloxicam?
Immune status, not to my knowledge in Canada, maybe elsewhere in the world, but the University of Guelph has done some work with Meloxicam to see whether or not it would improve the performance. It did not improve the performance, from, let's say, birth to weaning of the average pig. It did apparently improve the performance on the smallest pigs. Bern, do you have anything else you would like to add to that?
I think there is some data on performance of piglets, but also for sows, if you treat, not from Canada, but I think from Europe. That was presented at the ESPHM.
No, actually, I'm not the Meloxicam specialist in Canada, but for me, right now, what I saw on Meloxicam, there are studies, not necessarily in Canada, but elsewhere in the world, where it has improved the performance, from, let's say, birth to weaning, but there are other studies where they have not found it, so it's not as if it was always positive.
Thank you. Question over here.
Yes, this is for Jim Lowe. Your triangles that you had at Bloomberg's, your 40-plus years, how do you teach for bias that's been built in over the time frame of learning in the older generation?
I'm getting dangerously close to older myself, so that becomes a problem. Well, I think the fundamentals, so the question really is, right, what about bias as we get older and we're maybe less adaptable to new ideas? I actually think that's bias is often because we're ignorant of a better way, for lack of a better word. And so as we start to expose ourselves to new ideas and we continue to soak in those new ideas, and those ideas are made, remember the FAIR principles, are they relevant and to what we're doing today, and are they individualized to my needs today? I'm not suggesting that every veterinarian that's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years out of school needs the same skill set. And in fact, if you'd give me another hour and a half, Greg, I could have explained my theories on how we ought to be training veterinarians. But we all need individualized skills that are all very different. So someone working on the welfare side of a large organization interfacing with customers may need a different set of skills than someone who's primarily responsible for working at the barn level and implementing protocols versus someone who's going to sit in the office and work through diagnostic data and work on epi and tying that into production statistics. So my view of the education process is it's really about individualized and is irrelevant today. And I think if you deliver education in that format, the bias stuff goes away fairly quickly. I'm also enough of a believer in the market that at the end of the day, let's all be honest, this industry is going to continue to consolidate, and we don't need 1,500 veterinarians to take care of the pig herd in the future, right? So the market will sort some of that out for us if we can't figure out how to deliver that right set of skills and facts and use evidence-based approaches to solve it, because we won't be needed.
Paul.
Yeah, I've got a question for both Joe and Jim. Joe, I think you'd be disappointed in me if I didn't ask you this question, but I think I heard you say in your talk that as we look at PED and we go back and look at PED and where things have taken us over the 2 years, that this is a disease we don't have to continue to live with. And you know my bias on disease elimination, so I just wanted you to comment on that again, just so get your thoughts. And then I want to have Jim tell us how do we teach producers and veterinarians to come along with that if we decide to make that move.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, clearly it's a disease that I believe the industry should eliminate. And I'm actually ready to eliminate it in 2015. Our producers are not quite ready to do that because of the concern about what's the number of cases going to be as we get through the winter. I think if we look at Shemp and look at the USDA data, we do remain slightly below the epidemic curve. As I mentioned, I'm not sure we're fully reporting the finishing sites maybe quite as actively as what we should as separate source of infections versus the flow of the pigs. I will be very disappointed as we go into 2016 if we don't have a plan to eliminate the virus, Paul. Clearly, all of us in here can eliminate it from not only individual herds, but areas. The fact that we've had hardly any new cases this year would suggest that we have stopped the major part of the pathways. One of the things I would caution us on, I don't think we're looking at some of the new infections very aggressively. We're probably a little bit tired over the last 2 years. There have been some new cases. I think the clients or producers accept that they're not driving us as well to look at how that introduction is. So there's a little bit of question in the back of my mind, hoping that we haven't missed another method of introduction compared to what our research is showing us. The new cases that we've experienced, we've been able to explain most of them by area, risk, or finishing transportation backflow risk. The third category is these ones that are re-breaking that were, quote, negative for the last 10 or 12 months. I clearly think we need to look at those a little bit harder because they will challenge our thinking that we ought to be able to eliminate the virus. It'd be nice to know what the source of infection is on those particular herds. I think a key thing for our veterinary groups will be we're going to have to stop exposing gilts. And so we're going to have to convince our owners and our companies that at some point as we move forward with elimination, so maybe our goal, Paul, ought to be that we get them naturally exposed through next winter, but we stop going into the late fall with exposure of gilt so that when we get into the spring of 2016, we're lined up ready for elimination.
So, Paul, I'm glad you're on elimination. I'll continue on spreading, and we'll get this going good. But some days I feel like I'm more into disease spreading than I am elimination. On the path around how do we get them to come along, right? So how do we build an education system? I'm going to give you probably 2 examples, and it's the old baseball line, right? If you build it, they will come. And I think we've got plenty of evidence to suggest that both producers and veterinarians in particular are quite hungry for a different way, a better way, and a more way. So we've got 40 mostly bright minds and young minds, I should say. No, that's not true. We pick on one guy in the EVP class. So 39 of the 40, and the 39th is not here, but he knows who he is. Gets picked on, right? But we've got basically 40 people that signed up immediately to come in and say, I need to learn more, I need to have a different way. I look at Joe's meeting and say there's 500 producers that show up at that meeting every year and it continues to grow. I look at this meeting, right, we're going to have a tremendous attendance here the next few days. We are hungry for information. And if we design a way that's better, I think they'll really come along. The example I would give you on better is that at Illinois we have basically 0 food animal students when they enter the door as first years. We have 40 of them enrolled in our freshman production medicine course. Now, while you say that's exciting, the wildlife medicine course has 120 of the 135 enrolled. And you get up and you say, well, why do they all want to go hug bunnies? It's actually neither one of those. They are hungry for a different way to be taught. And if you look at, we get to touch every first year in the first 8 weeks that they're on campus. So we get them in groups of 16. We handle them for an entire week. We went at them very differently. Us and the wildlife group have gone after our students very differently in terms of how we've challenged them. We've used the FAIR principles, we've used flipped classroom techniques, so that for 1 week they get deeply immersed in a very different way to learn than what they experience in the rest of the deal. So even though they may or may not be interested in what we're talking about, they're so hungry to be taught a different way that they come and take our elective courses at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. So I think that's pretty strong evidence that the system would suggest that if we approach them in an active, personalized manner, we will get people to continue to come. As I look at our evaluations out of the EVP course, which we get feedback on, right, those that can really engage and challenge the students and think differently and force them to apply problems continue to get very good reviews compared to the lecturing format. So I think it works, guys. It's really a matter of us, as those of us that are going to be engaged in education and instructing, taking the time, effort, and energy to commit to doing it, because it's a bloody lot of work. And it's about us thinking differently and being willing to work hard enough to get it over the hump, Paul.
Greg, you got another one there?
I do. We'll stay on the theme of PED, and I'm actually going to throw 2 questions out here. And question number 1 will be to Peter. Peter, what's the situation with PED in Europe? The second part of the question will be to Dr. Connor. And based upon the fact that there were more than 30 cases of PED by mid-May, I'd like to know where you think PED came from.
Europe. It came from Europe. I think in Western Europe we've adopted a don't ask, don't tell policy on PED. No, on a serious note, we've got indale isolates in Germany, in Holland, in Spain. Anecdotal evidence suggests that there is a larger outbreak going through Ukraine right now, along with a lot of bombshells and tanks. So we got it. EU is really playing that on the down low, but certainly we've isolated in 3-4 different countries, and I would venture that we've got it in a lot more, but we're not looking. So we haven't learned anything from the US or the Canadian examples. So it's quite disappointing, to be honest with you.
We still don't know the answer, Greg. But I think there's a number of interesting things that tell us early on what was different and where we did look and should continue to look. And if you just go back and you total up all of the things we observed early on, one is a geographical dispersion of the original, or certainly the early cases. Really difficult to understand what their linkages would be. It certainly was not the obvious. Secondly, a lot of our high health status herds became infected. So we can say there was a weakness in biosecurity, but yet it certainly wasn't a weakness that we recognized, and it wasn't a weakness that veterinarians was not auditing on a regular basis. Third, a lot of our small family farms with really weak biosecurity never did become infected. So what are they doing differently? Well, they a lot of times got their own feed mill. They inherently store ingredients, not by planning, but just by the way they order, and have a lot longer time lapse from ingredients coming in. We obviously lost filtered farms, so you'd think, well, it doesn't come in by aerosol because that should protect those farms. We knew that once it got into an area, then the things we normally know that are at risk really break down. So there, transportation biosecurity becomes a big factor tied with weather. If you then go back and say, we know something about feed ingredients today, we're clearly limited by our bioassays and our ability to, again, grow the virus. There's enough epidemiological studies that would support, we had introduction by feed ingredients. Hard to pin necessarily which one of those individual ingredients, at least consistently, was a problem. The fact that we have, in many cases, but not exclusively, my data I've seen would be that about 50% of the industry is still using some of those ingredients, so probably using with the new technology of storage and temperature. The big question comes in, of course, is where were the originals? And was that, and we still don't know enough about survivability, transport survivability over long distances. I would say that that pathway has not been looked at as aggressively as what it should be looked at, partially because of some inherent landmines within that, and also partially because of not necessarily knowing where to look. There is some analysis still going on today. Whether it will get us the answer, I'm not sure.
Brian, one more question. Got time for one more?
Just a question on, Dell commented on what ground zero for Meloxicam, and if Greg Klein wouldn't mind, I'd pass the mic to him because he has said it best that I've heard. What is ground zero for the pain, I guess, us starting at ground zero if BI would want to move forward?
Yeah, we've done a little bit of looking into that, and Angela kind of talked a little bit about it in her presentation, but today the way I understand it is that there is not an accepted pain model, measurement of pain model with the FDA. So that kind of limits the quick arrival of a product, because before you're going to be able to go through that process, there's going to have to be an establishment of what is pain, how do you measure it, and how do you measure a reduction of it on a certain indication. So that's one of the challenges that is faced. And Angela's reached for a microphone and lay it on us.
Well, with what they've done at Iowa State now, with 3 separate methods of evaluating pain, 2 in the sow and the 1 in the pigs, is FDA looking at those? Do you know if they know about those and if it's down the path of using those as a pain model?
My understanding is that they're aware of it, but they've not accepted that it's validated and it is the model.
How do we get it accepted?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Sounds like a great job for our welfare committees that we've got in our organizations to work with.
Good job.
Sorry, Angela. It's really been a great afternoon. We've had a lot of dialogue. I just think we owe a great round of applause again for our 4 speakers today.